On September 14th, 2007, 14-year-old Andrew Gosden was living in Doncaster, South Yorkshire, with his family. Andrew was described as being more of an introvert. He was mostly happy with his own company, but he wasn't a loner, as he did have a small group of like-minded friends at school. But he really didn't socialize with his friends outside of school. He enjoyed spending time at home with his family or by himself. And he was known to be a gifted student and described as a prize-winning mathematician who seemed destined for Cambridge University. Although Andrew's attitude towards school was more neutral, though he had been hoping that the upcoming school term would be more of a challenge because, after all, he had somewhat been cruising through his education by this point. It seemed like Andrew said very little to his parents about his school life. But during the summer of 2006, Andrew would attend a 2-week residential school at Lancaster University, and it was part of the Young, Gifted, and Talented program. This summer school is for children all over the UK who are in the top 5% academically. Andrew's parents would recall that when he returned home from summer school, he seemed more enthused and perhaps more excited for the upcoming year. But on that day in September of 2007, Andrew would board a train after emptying all the money out of his account and simply vanish. Although that day on September 14th, 2007 seemed like any other day, Andrew did seem to be having difficulty waking up, and he seemed quite irritable. It did seem unusual because Andrew was typically an early riser, but his family really didn't think much of it. They just figured he's a teenager, and it seemed like a typical teenager issue. Andrew would leave the house to go to his bus stop at the usual time at 8:05 a.m. in his school uniform, and he did head in the direction of his bus stop. Although Andrew was only 8 days into the school year, his parents really had no idea that Andrew had stopped taking the school bus and had been walking the 6.4 kilometers home every single day. Andrew's father stated that Andrew tended to be absent-minded, not very streetwise, and quite frankly, potentially vulnerable. He would say that he was a deep character who did not get worked up or moody. Even Andrew's teachers characterized him as shy. He was a quiet young man, but he was mature beyond his years. And although Andrew was 14 years old, he did look a bit younger, maybe more so around the age of 12, considering he was small for his age. Andrew wore strong prescription glasses, he was deaf in his left ear, and he had a distinctive double ridge on his right ear. He had light brown hair, but he had wanted to dye it black. So on that morning, although he was headed in the direction of his bus stop, he never got on the school bus. Instead, Andrew would head to an ATM, withdraw €200 from his bank account, and then simply waited in the park until his parents and sister left the house to go to work. After Andrew was sure that his parents had left home and that his sister went to school, he went home, changed out of his school uniform, which he placed in the washing machine. He popped on a black Slipknot t-shirt, black jeans, and packed up his favorite book bag. It appears he took with him his wallet, house keys, and a portable PlayStation device. But he did leave behind $100 in cash that he had received from his birthday, the charger to that PlayStation, and a coat. It does appear that by 8:30 a.m., Andrew had already left home. He would walk to the train station and simply buy a one-way ticket to London. The ticket seller did remember Andrew because she tried to sell him a round trip because it wasn't that much more expensive, but he did insist on a one-way ticket. At around 9:35 a.m. in the morning, Andrew did board that train. A woman who was on the same train sat next to him, and she remembers him as being fully engrossed and playing on his PlayStation. Andrew's train would arrive in London at around 11:20 a.m., and CCTV footage would capture him leaving the station at around 11:25 a.m. Unfortunately, that was the last confirmed sighting of Andrew. The thing is, no one appears to have noticed that Andrew went missing. The school had attempted to notify his parents that Andrew hadn't gone to school because it's very unusual. And of course, there was protocols in place. Unfortunately, the school had called the wrong number to inform his parents that Andrew had never arrived to school that day. On the night he disappeared, the Gosden family sat down and had dinner as usual. They assumed that Andrew was either in his room playing video games or doing homework. When his parents realized that Andrew wasn't actually at home, they started calling around to friends to try and locate him. They simply assumed that perhaps he was with friends and he just lost track of time. His mother would soon learn some horrifying news. One of his friends would state that Andrew hadn't gone to school at all, and around 7 p.m. that night, the police were called to report Andrew missing. His parents really believed that there was no reason for Andrew to run away, and that perhaps he had gotten into an accident of some kind or that he was kidnapped. Andrew's sister Charlotte would go on to say, "It was just a complete panic. We initially thought something must have happened on the way to school. When we found out that he hadn't even been to school, even tried to go to school, that was even more worrying." Of course, everybody hit the streets immediately to start to look for Andrew, but unfortunately, they found nothing. 3 hours later, they had a missing person flyer with all of Andrew's details, and they were out posting it and handing it to anybody that they could find. 3 days later, the police did confirm that Andrew had traveled to London. Of course, the police would question why Andrew wouldn't buy a round-trip ticket, but Andrew's father would state that it really wasn't surprising to him that his son purchased a single ticket rather than a round trip. The Gosden family knew plenty of people in London, some family, some friends, so he figured that perhaps his son went to London on a one-way ticket, knew he could stay with people, and then simply returned when he was ready. The Gosden family would travel to London, and they would hand out flyers and posters in proximity to where they felt that Andrew would have been or had an interest in. They believed that perhaps Andrew just wanted to sightsee, so they went to places like museums and exhibitions and things like that. At first, the British Transport Police searched the CCTV footage within 2 days of Andrew going missing. But they couldn't pick him up and, find him in all of the crowds. But 3 weeks later, they would review that same footage and they were able to identify him in some of the CCTV images. The police and Andrew's family really had one main question in their mind. Why had Andrew traveled to London in the first place? His family, his teachers, his friends knew that it was so unlike him to ditch school. And then on top of that, he ditched school, he went to an ATM, he withdrew 200 pounds, although it seemed like he probably wanted to withdraw all of his balance, which was 214 pounds. But the ATM only gave out, 20-pound increments. So not only did he ditch school, he took all of his money, he went back home, he grabbed just a couple things, his book bag, his portable PlayStation, he didn't take the charger, he didn't take his passport, and he didn't take the extra cash that he had received for his birthday. So why did Andrew hop on a train and travel to London that day? Andrew didn't have any social media, so his family really felt like he didn't go to London to meet up with anybody. Though many people thought that perhaps Andrew had been groomed, his family didn't see how it would have been likely. There was only one computer in the house, and that belonged to his sister, and it was her laptop, and Andrew didn't even have access to it. Investigators would head to Andrew's school to check the computers, and they didn't find anything. They even went to the local library, but nothing related to Andrew had been found. So not only was Andrew's portable PlayStation checked, but his other video game consoles were also checked. And it appears that he never used the device features that would allow him to talk to other people. And his sister would simply state that Andrew had very little interest in connecting with people online. She said he just didn't seem social. Andrew's father would state that Andrew never even had an email address. He didn't set up an online account on his Xbox or his portable PlayStation, and really there's just no trace of him. Of course, many people are saying this is 2007, so why not just track his phone? Andrew had been gifted a phone on his 12th birthday, but when he lost it, he did tell his parents that he didn't want them to replace it. Instead, he would prefer that he got an Xbox. So of course, this young 14-year-old boy didn't even have a phone where, perhaps police could get more evidence and figure out where exactly he was headed to or who he was talking to. It really seemed that Andrew was pretty unsocial. I mean, they checked his Xbox, they checked, his portable PlayStation, and he wasn't, or at least it doesn't appear that he was talking to anyone. He didn't have a cell phone, so he wasn't talking to anybody, via cell phone. They couldn't track his movements. He really was kind of just an introverted kid that apparently didn't really want to socialize. Andrew was very interested in video games and heavy metal bands. As you can see in the surveillance video, he was last seen wearing a black Slipknot t-shirt, black jeans, a watch on his left wrist, and carrying a black book bag with patches of rock and metal bands on it. Investigators did have one thing they wanted to try. They sent the unique serial number of Andrew's portable PlayStation to Sony headquarters. And Sony would check, and they found that there was no record of an account being set up or communication established on the device. So if Andrew wasn't going to meet somebody on that day, why had he been traveling to London? Had he planned on just sightseeing? Had he just wanted to escape for the day? Was he just bored at school because he didn't find it all that taxing and hard? According to Andrew's father, Andrew did have good knowledge of how the public transportation system worked. He knew the layout, and he was confident in navigating his way around the city. Apparently, at the time of his disappearance, travel on buses was free for all children. So again, the family did have friends and family in London, and they would often visit them. The family would suggest that perhaps Andrew went to see a concert on the night of his disappearance. 30 Seconds to Mars was playing, and that venue was in walking distance from King's Cross. There was a canal nearby, and it's unclear whether this was ever checked. But again, there's no evidence that he actually went to see this band or that he was around the canal. It seems like he left that train station and kind of vanished into thin air. Andrew's father would say that perhaps Andrew had gone to London to do something for which he felt it was easier to seek forgiveness than ask permission. So perhaps Andrew did want to go see a band that day or do something like go to a museum or a special event, but he knew his parents wouldn't either want him to go alone or to skip school that day. On the night before Andrew disappeared, his family said it was a rather uneventful night. They ate dinner together as usual. They all got together, they washed the dishes, and then Andrew and his father would sit down together and put together a jigsaw puzzle. And then he would watch some TV with his mother. It was a very average and normal evening for the Gosden family. In 2009, Kevin would say, did he decide to do a Reginald Perrin thing and reinvent himself? Or was there something troubling him that he felt he couldn't tell us? In my heart, I still think his disappearance was a spur of the moment thing. So Kevin, Andrew's father, brought up that TV show, The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, which was a story about a main character who fakes his death and starts a new life. The thing about that is Andrew didn't take enough to go on an extended journey. He didn't pack any clothing, not even just a sweater to stay warm. He didn't take his portable PlayStation charger, and he left cash at home, so one would think that perhaps if he did want to take his portable PlayStation, he would at least take the charger. And if he wanted to go start a new life, he definitely would have brought some clothing and whatever money he could get on that day. To me, I do feel like he perhaps planned on coming home, that he wanted to go do something, and he did feel it was better to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. Kevin Gosden would claim that the police viewed him as a suspect during the initial stages, and that they carried out unlawful recording interviews so that they could pressure him into revealing the reason for his son's disappearance, although Kevin and the family were eventually cleared of any involvement. It appears that the family was frustrated that perhaps the police were focusing far too much on them and not what could have been, happening to Andrew at that time. But it is the police's job to clear those closest to a victim at the very beginning. Andrew's father would say that there were 2 or 3 sightings within the first week of the disappearance that seemed quite credible. The most plausible being the sighting, which placed Andrew at a Pizza Hut about an hour's walk from King's Cross. And that was on the day that he went missing. There is one sighting that claimed on September 17th, Andrew was seen sleeping at the park. He was reportedly seen getting off a train from Waterloo at Mortlake Station on September 19th, 2007. And then a month later, a woman would report a potential sighting of Andrew. She said that she saw a boy in Covent Garden, and she spoke to the boy and stated that he looked like a boy she had seen on TV that went missing. But the boy did deny that he was Andrew. In 2009, there were 2 possible sightings that were reported. One which was outside the Natural History Museum, the other in a pub in Southend. Of course, none of these sightings could be verified, but Kevin Gosden would claim that none of these sightings had ever been followed up by the police. And then in November of 2008, a man would visit a police station, and he would use an intercom system to talk to police officers. And he said that he had information about Andrew. Because it was the evening, the intercom system was in use rather than a staffed reception. But by the time the officer arrived to take the details, the man had already left. Of course, police would appeal for this person to get back in touch. And this man would write anonymously to the BBC. He gave details of a possible sighting of Andrew and Shrewsbury in November of 2008. Although there hasn't been confirmation that the same man who went to the police station to report this and the man who wrote in were obviously the same people, considering he didn't wait at the police station. In November of 2009, Kevin would appeal to the gay community. Andrew's family had long considered that perhaps Andrew had been struggling with his sexual orientation. Kevin would go on to say, "We're a pretty open family, so we have wondered if he was gay or struggling with his sexual identity and found it too awkward to raise. If he is gay, we do not have any issue with it. He is loved unconditionally by both my wife and I and his sister." Although Andrew's parents were quite religious at the time of his disappearance, they never forced their religion on their children. They wanted their children to just kind of figure out what they believed in and then, believe in it. They didn't want to just shove religion down their throats and say, this is what we believe, so you believe in it. So perhaps, because Andrew did go to church, maybe he was struggling with his sexual identity and he didn't know how to feel or what to believe. But in May of 2011, the family would pay a private company to conduct a sonar search of the river, but there was no trace of Andrew found. But they did find another body. Strangely enough, in June of 2018, Andrew's family would receive a tip that somebody online had had a conversation with a person with the username Andy Rue. Rue is a nickname that the family had given to Andrew as a child. This person, Andy Rue, claimed that their boyfriend had left them and they needed $200 to cover the rent. When someone offered to send them money, the user claimed they did not have a bank account because they had, quote, left home when they were 14. This was investigated by police, but the person was not identified. Andrew's family has kept his room just as he left it on that day. They didn't even change the locks to the door because Andrew did take his key. His bank account has not been used since he made that withdrawal on the morning of September 14th, 2007. But then in January 2022, South Yorkshire police would arrest two men, aged 38 and 45, and this was on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking. One of the men's arrests was connected with possession of indecent images of children. Numerous devices have been taken from these men for forensic investigation, though that could take 6 months to a year. And then in January 2023, South Yorkshire police said that the men remained under investigation and that the devices that they had taken from these men were also still under examination. Of course, Andrew's family wants him to know that he's loved unconditionally, and if anybody knows anything about where he is or anything about what happened to him on that day, to please reach out. The thing is, another gifted student would go missing 10 months after Andrew. 16-year-old Alexander Slawley, and quite frankly, there are some parallels to Andrew's case. Alexander failed to return home from a friend's home, and he had little money on him, no extra clothing, and he didn't have his passport at the time. Although Alexander did have a cell phone, on the day that he went missing, the connection appears to have been lost. And it does appear that Alexander was last reported to have been around the King's Cross station in the same area that Andrew had disappeared in. Although investigators believe that there could be a link in the case, they aren't sure what the relationship is. Alexander was just a few days shy of turning 17 years old. His mother would say, "I think about him every day. My last memory of him was telling him to get off my bed and go to sleep in your own bed. I do wish he was still on my bed and still sleeping there." His mother would say, "Alex is boisterous, protective, he's got a caring and soft heart, and is loyal. He liked football, liked dressing immaculately, and looking and smelling good. He liked traditional West Indian food, like fried plantain, dumplings, and porridge." But she doesn't believe that her son is living under a new identity. He didn't have his passport, he didn't really have any money, so how could he possibly be out there and living as somebody else? Although police believe there's no evidence of harm in this case, his national insurance number, passport, and bank accounts have never been accessed since the day he went missing. What's strange about these two cases is two young boys went missing. They didn't have really anything with them, not enough money to go missing. They didn't have their passports. In Andrew's case, he went home, he changed his clothing after waiting for his family to leave their home. He grabbed some money from the ATM, grabbed his PlayStation, his portable PlayStation, and then, he hopped a train, he minded his own business, he got there, and kind of feels like he just vanished. Perhaps he did go to a concert, perhaps he, went to museums, or he went to an event and unfortunately met some unsavory character. But I would love to know your guys' thoughts on this case. What happened to Andrew?